Welcome to Chapter 4, the Everything Engine as a Cognitive Processing Living Human System. We are now ready to unpack our understanding of a human as a system. In so doing, we should be able to answer the question, what does it mean to be human? We are going to start with the Everything Engine in continuum form. Which is this? Let's start with this image, but rotate it around and made bigger. The first 6 aspects are located evenly spaced around the equator of the sphere. The largest circle on the outside is the equator. Each equatorial aspect is responsible for rendering for the rest of the system an answer to one question only. This means that each aspect is simply posing one preset question. This question is done in a computer style called a query. This means that each aspect is simply posing one preset question and accepting a preset response from the respective database. These databases are distinguished as the poles of the sphere, with 3 pointing up and 3 pointing down. If you need to, please take a moment to pause the video and familiarize yourself with these positions. Here's what those individual questions are by aspect. Here we have the ego, which answers the question, what is real? If you were to walk into a room, everything in that room needs to be understood within its sphere of influence. Your ego is working on that pattern matching process, trying to understand what it is dealing with. The ego is making sure there are no experiential blind spots it has to worry about, nothing in its way. The ego sets forth belief of the room or area, and once done, a person might want or need to be able to act on that information. To, let's say, negotiate themselves around a room full of people. So, the physical body is there to answer, how do I behave? And by design, the body also supplies the needed parts to do the required actions. And these actions will receive reactions from the outside world, which teach someone something about the external reality. This new information needs to be understood, so the processing event is turned over to the next aspect in the chain. This is an excellent place then for the superego, which answers, what does this mean? And again, by utilizing simple pattern matching programs, the superego works to figure out underlying meanings of reactions based on previous reactions it has already experienced. Once it makes a match, if it can, that matching memory needs to be hard-coded into the brain and connected to its fellow matches so it can be remembered with the group later. So the new decision or understanding goes to the intellect/brain, which is our whole brain, and it's responsible for answering, what do I believe? The new idea is presented to be compared to other former ideas. If accepted, this opinion is quite physically hardwired into the brain. The whole system has a clean slate and can run a system check to see if any other part might need something. What does the system need? Or what can run this program? Having the id next keeps this process constantly rolling forward. The id is constantly answering, what do I want? What do I want? What do I want? Once decided though, it can't just act. The id doesn't have that much power. Plus, what the system is capable of doing needs to be addressed first, a type of feasibility study. Basically, the whole system needs a status check in order to see what it is capable of doing next, in order to get its desires fulfilled. So we next visit the endocrine system, which answers, how do I feel? Dr. Barrett gave us the words for emotions, which are being produced somewhere. It is the endocrine system that is in charge of producing those four emotional forces: pleasant, unpleasant, arousal, and calm. That is why it looks thicker coming from that location on this illustration. This sets an internal stage, but the ego is needed again to give us feedback on what is going on with the outside world. The system may feel like it can do something, but a reality check keeps desires anchored in reality. We are back to the beginning, and you can see how this cycle is able to logically continue. It is mechanically able to continue because of another aspect, a point of focus called the programmer. The programmer is the part of the self that changes or programs what is being put into this system. These equatorial aspects, they don't move. The programmer or the point of focus does. When the programmer is going forward, it is processing reality. Going backwards along this same causal line, this allows the programmer to recall past data points or events. Remaining over an aspect, the programmer is able to hold the focus of that aspect in a continuous loop. Other settings might allow the programmer to flash quickly over an aspect, creating, instead of focus, a dismissive void. So far, all these events are happening on the equator. What about that center section? This central core is different than any other aspect. It's also passive and doesn't move, meaning that it doesn't make any changes to the system like the mobile programmer. The purpose of the central core is a solitary one, but it balances the whole other series of aspects. It does this by answering a single real question, not a query, for the whole system. The central core is a binary protocol, meaning it can only simply reply either yes or no. This is unlike a query response, where the answer could be anything already coded in a database, from a smell to a word or a whole past memory. The central core is straight up quality control, and it is in charge of answering, are you being true to what you put inside me? That's it, no more or less. It is finally with all of these aspects working together that the mind and body are able to perform their cooperative functions. They do this by constantly creating internal simulations, and just like how a video is made, but this one is in your mind. The director of your internal simulations is the programmer. The producers are the equatorial aspects supplying scenery, background, and context. And the central core is like the mood-setting musical soundtrack. The four colors inside the everything engine you can think of as fuel. Going back to the movie in your mind metaphor, you can think of this fuel as making up the dialogue and body language for the internal characters you will be projecting. For this model as a human system, the fuel again is just the flavors that the endocrine system uses to establish an emotional reality: pleasant, unpleasant, arousal, and calm. Thus, the everything engine has now rendered for us a logic-based processing of a human system. Now, logic-based processing is not the same as physical processing. I admit that we don't look like this, which is why I can say that the equatorial aspects don't move. But we do process reality in this cooperative fashion. That is made more evident when we look at why the equatorial aspects can be said to be in the correct place. The truth is in the symmetry. There is symmetry to this pattern and a balance that can be called inverse and opposite. This is how I explained earlier that we are able to run self-tests on this model. Does it follow the inverse and opposite symmetry? I'm going to describe inverse and opposite empirically first, before we unpack it in more detail. It might seem scary, but it's very intuitive. You've heard these words before, just maybe not used in this context. Inverse and opposite are terms simply taken from math and physics. They also describe the relationship between two objects and how they work. For starters, the programmer and its relationship to all the equatorial aspects is inverse and opposite to the central core. Where the central core is a lone binary process, the programmer and the equatorial aspects work together in a dynamic ensemble. So while these two seemingly different groups function in opposite ways, they are also connected in this continuum together. This makes the everything engine a continuum object, with all these characters existing inverse and opposite to each other at the same time. It's the perfect balancing act. But here's the cooler part. This pattern exists in every symmetry, on every level of this model, meaning everything created inside it may be described as a collection of those things that are inverse and opposite to it. So, if you can make a list of rules to describe something, you can make another set of rules that describe the inverse and opposite to it. That's it. Let's look at some more examples. Notice for starters that the ego is across from the intellect/brain. The ego is a cognitive or an electrical process, while the intellect/brain, this level is dealing with the mechanical or physical processes of coding in new data points. Those functions can be said to be inverse and opposite, but connected to the same underlying concept, that of trying to establish a reality. So imagine that the programmer, that point of focus, and think of it sitting on the ego to indicate that the ego is trying to render the answer, what is real? The ego is reviewing the external world and breaking it down into parts so it can be compared to former patterns. The instructions for breaking down reality are stored in its database, but it also needs to know how to deal with what it finds, and potentially in real time. So it should make sense that the ego would therefore need a seamless interface with the intellect/brain in order to be able to access its database containing the things that the person currently believes to be real. This means that in order for the ego to work efficiently, it must engage the intellect/brain as a passive database. How does this play out in real life? Well, imagine that you find yourself talking to someone who you realize is being egotistical. This isn't obnoxious by itself. It starts out simply by being a tool of hyper-focus, so you wait to see how stuck they are. They are going to be proud of their own ideas, since they picked them to begin with, and now have a chance to show them off. They are also more likely going to be protective of those things they believe in. The ego needs them to do its job, and a hole in knowledge would undermine the authority of the ego, which would be unpleasant to say the least. This is important to know because if you need to teach a person a new belief or something contrary to what they believe, you won't be able to reach them. Not until they move their programmer or their point of focus into the region of the human system that can do those chores. This in turn disengages the intellect/brain as a passive database, so it is then available to act as an active database. Once free, it can accept new reasoning and therefore code in the new belief directly to its active database. Number 2. Another inverse and opposite alignment is the physical body across from the id. Your id is your cravings, your deep-seated desires, and with its position across from the physical body, the id basically has the keys to the car. Ever have an experience where you have no memory of sticking food in your mouth, but before you could stop yourself, you are eating another cold French fry? You aren't crazy for this, but this is impulsive. Impulses aren't bad, but they can grow unchecked if fed improperly. If a person can abuse their ego, they may also abuse their id, morphing a simple impulse into a deeper, unchecked compulsion. And poof, we have an explanation for addiction, which is so prevalent not because people are weak or lazy. It is because we are wired in such a way that if you don't garner self-discipline and establish control over your environment by a certain stage, you are or will be placed at the mercy of these strong pulls. No one is immune from this either. We all have addictive personalities. It's just a part of our inverse and opposite symmetry. 3. Lastly, the superego and the endocrine system are where reasoning meets feelings. Have you ever heard of something called emotional spoon theory? Take a moment again and search for this and find the wiki article or an infographic. It's a great tool for interpersonal communications. This is the abstract analogy describing the relationship that seemed to exist between mood and motivation. It's not easy to do anything if you don't feel like it without negative consequences to the self. This is sometimes called living one's truth, but if your truth isn't established perfectly, without flaws, a person can easily get stuck. Anyone can get stuck in either an infinite causal loop, chasing rabbits down endless corridors, or a person can just become halted altogether. Cognitive health, therefore, is a gauge of not just the chemical and electrical system, but its relationship with the physical and mechanical one as well. What you reason begins a feedback loop. What you feel affects your thoughts. What you think affects your body. And your body affects your feelings. And round it is supposed to go. This is in alignment with Dr. Barrett's research that says that emotional experiences are constructed. This is how. If you aren't in control of your personal everything engine, though, this becomes admittedly a spinning nightmare. Humans are able to create illusions in their head. It's completely true, and we know this in severe cases to be insanity. What is also true is that with reason, we can also escape various degrees of insanity and stand once again on a solid foundation. That is what the math tells us, that insanity is just a temporary condition we all have until we've gained enough experience to be wiser. The programmer proves that you can change your mind, but also that all these systems need to work together in order to create a balanced picture of a whole reality. That is what keeps a human balanced in that reality. All of these things are done because of the inverse and opposite symmetry, which will be shown to be the mother of all symmetries. It is a crucial topic, so we are going to spend the next chapter reviewing more about it. Afterwards, we will go back and blend Dr. Barrett's modern theory of constructed emotion directly into the everything engine. This will finally give us a better framework for everyone to better answer the personal question of, how are you feeling? We will also be reviewing the evidence for human consciousness, unpacking the art behind the boot sequence, and going over the math it takes to measure a human system. Stay tuned and keep watching. This has been Sandy Flowers. Stop on the recording!